Hello and welcome to another edition of GNAT-TV's In-Depth series. I'm Andrew McKeever, the news director here at GNAT-TV. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. Today is July 9th, and we are also very happy to have with us here in our studio Bennington County Sheriff Chad Schmidt, who is running for re-election to that post. The Democratic primary, both primaries are going to be held on August 14th, a little over a month away as we're here today, but early voting is already underway in most of the towns within the county, so not too soon to start paying attention to this very important race. Sheriff Schmidt has headed up the Bennington County Sheriff's Department since 2009 when he was appointed to fill the last year of the term of his predecessor, Sheriff Gary Forrest. He won re-election to the post in his own right the following year in 2010, and then again in 2014. So he's running again for re-election for what would be a third four-year term. In the Democratic primary this year, he is being opposed by a former Bennington Police Department policeman, James Gully Jr. And we will be hearing from Mr. Gully in an upcoming broadcast. Sheriff Schmidt has been working with the Sheriff's Department for nearly 25 years. He started as a part-time deputy straight out of high school. When he was 18, he came to Bennington to go to Southern Vermont College and study there, and did a little part-time job on the side. Turned into a career.
It did.
Sheriff Schmidt, welcome to GNAT. Thank you for making the time out of what I know is a very busy schedule to be here with us. And
thank you for having me.
Tell us a little bit about the department. Well, okay, so 24 years have come and gone. What were some of the jobs that you filled in between that point when you were starting at Southern Vermont College and before you became the chief?
So I started in 1994 part-time while I was attending school, which was great because most of the work that I had to do was in the evenings or late or early in the morning, however you want to look at it. So it didn't interfere with daytime classes. So I progressed up through the ranks in 1997 after I graduated with a bachelor's degree in criminal justice. Gary Forrest offered me a full-time position. So in 1998 I was full-time with the department. I attended the full-time basic academy, which is it's now a 16-week program. Way back then it was a 13-week program. And then I just continued my career. I was a DARE officer for a lot of years throughout the county, taught at a lot of different schools. And just progressed up through the ranks and eventually held the rank of captain. Gary Forrest was very instrumental in educating me on how to run the department, not only through external classes like the FBI National Academy, which really teaches you how to become an executive law enforcement officer, where the Vermont Police Academy teaches you how to be a police officer, but not necessarily how to lead an agency. And I've also continued my education. I attended Columbia Southern University and got a master's degree in business administration, public administration. So that's what has uniquely qualified me to run the agency. When I got to the rank of captain, Gary decided it was time for him to retire. Governor Douglas appointed me in 2009 to fill the rest of that term, and 9 years later, here we are.
The rest is history. Well, what are some of the main functions or areas within the law enforcement arena that the county sheriff's office typically handles? I think probably a lot of people don't have a clear idea as to what you do. I know we see your patrol cars out on the road and stopping people for, sort of taking liberties with the speed limit or whatever, but I'm sure there's a lot more that goes on beyond that.
Yeah, I think this is our biggest obstacle is communicating really what our essential tasks are and how we're funded. So back in the 50s, when the Vermont legislature created the Vermont State Police, that took primary patrol function away from my department. So we were no longer the agency responsible to respond to calls. That became the responsibility of the Vermont State Police. And now, of course, we have several municipal agencies, so towns like Manchester and Bennington have a local police department, and so they have primary responsibility for their jurisdiction. So when you see a patrol car of mine out enforcing speed limit or responding to calls, we look at that as a secondary approach because those towns have chosen to contract with us to supplement what they're getting from either the Vermont State Police or whoever their primary law enforcement agency is. So we really aren't funded to go out there and do those things unless the towns that hire us to do that. And of course then that select board would set the priority for what they want us to be doing, whether it's speed enforcement or parking complaints or barking dog complaints. They work closely with us to respond to those types of citizen complaints and prioritize what we're doing. And I got to tell you, it's much different from one end of the county to the other. You know, what the town of Dorset wants us to be doing is completely different than what the town of Reedsboro or Stanford wants.
Oh, that's
So,
interesting.
you know, like in Stanford, we get a lot of people coming up from Massachusetts and dumping garbage in our national forest area. So that's a very big priority for them. Not so much the speeding; they want that issue handled. Dorset, it might be patrolling the quarries because they get so busy this time of year, or you know, watching the speed limit in the you know, Dorset proper area. So you have to be responsive to what the towns want, and that's the message that I think most people don't understand. We don't get tax dollars directly. We have to work through contracts, and so our yearly annual budget is determined by how many contracts we have and how much money we bring in. So it's significantly different than any other type of law enforcement that you'll see.
And you're also responsible for ferrying prisoners or people coming down from Rutland to go to court in Bennington and that sort of...
Right.
as
So
well as,
our mandated functions by statute are to transport prisoners around the state and to serve civil process. So anything else that we do is by virtue of contract and, you know, filling a void or a need within our community.
mm-hmm. And how many officers and staff are in the department?
So we have 34 deputies currently, most of which are part-time. We have 8 full-time deputies plus 2 that are provided by the state. In other words, I don't pay their benefits, but they're responsible for the mandated function of transporting prisoners. So, and then we have two office staff who do secretarial type stuff, billing, civil process, making sure that stuff gets served, and then a dispatcher who handles all the calls that we get in scheduling. So it's a quite busy office.
What's the total size of the budget?
So last year we did just over 1.2 million in expenses, or I'm sorry, in income. And then most of that goes right back out the door in benefits and administrative costs. So, you know, we're lucky at the end of the year to capture between 50 and 75,000 of that to have in the bank going forward.
Okay. And so this sounds a bit like running a business almost.
It very much is. It very much is. And when I went to get my master's degree, I knew, you know, I could have probably more easily gotten one in criminal justice because I have the experience,
right.
and some of the classes I probably, you know, would have been much easier. But I felt that because I run a business, I wanted to be more attuned to business degree and learning marketing and all that kind of, you know, how to manage a budget, those types of things. So, you know, I chose to get a master's degree in public administration for that reason.
What do you see as the main challenges looming ahead for the department? Anything strike you as you look forward over the next 4 years and say, wow, we're going to have to really get our arms around this?
Well, I mean, a continuing theme is always the financial end. There's no security blanket there. There's no, you know, there's no select board or government body that's going to bail me out if I come into financial trouble. So that's always at the back of our mind. Any initiatives or incentives that we have to do, we have to make sure that there's a valid funding source for that. So we always have to be cognizant of that. The legislative changes that are made, and you know, the increasing costs of health care, those are all part and parcel, because a lot of times you'll have an unfunded mandate where we have to have a certain type of training and all the deputies will have to go through it. So yes, we have a training budget, but you know, you have to cater the training to what is mandated, and then also what I feel is necessary for them to have as an elective course. So we have not only the mandatory, but then there's some elective courses that I require them to take. So, you know, that changing scenario happens on an annual basis, and it's kind of difficult to forecast, well, where do we need to be for next year for this budget, or you know, what are the topics and the issues that we're going to have to focus on. So that's kind of the changing, always in the back of my mind, you know, keep me up at night kind of things. I think on a national level, policing is changing in many ways for, you know, good reasons, and I'm happy of that. But I think we need to be more partners in the community. We need to break down the silos, start working more collaboratively, and we've done that over the past 9 years under my leadership, where we're working with other organizations who have overarching goals. You know, our goals are similar, so it makes sense to partner. And a lot of the grants and things that people are applying for require that, in fact. So, you know, we've been focusing on that.
Has the job of being the chief of the department changed much in the last 9 to 10 years since you've been at the head?
Yes and no. I think, again, the national outlook on policing has created a big change where, everybody has a cell phone. The videos, when that was introduced, that made us take a look at making sure that we're treating people with respect and dignity. I think we always have had a good relationship with that, but the cell phone, obviously, everybody has a camera. It's important that we hone those skills, that we use our verbal techniques to de-escalate. So, the policing has changed, and being responsible for 34 people who all carry guns, that's another thing that keeps you up at night. It's a very stressful job, but it's also very rewarding. If you look at some of the projects we did, for example, over this last holiday season, we had the Santa's Helper program where we got businesses to donate. The deputies donated money, and we spent upwards of $5,000 buying gifts for kids in need. We went to the schools. We delivered gifts. We went out on Northside Drive. Walmart partnered with us, so we'd stop a car. We'd start, for a legitimate reason, whether it be speeding or an inspection sticker or what have you. The deputy would engage in a conversation asking how their holiday season was going. Is there anything that they needed yet that they hadn't purchased? And through that conversation, the deputy would go back and radio to another deputy who was in Walmart, basically go through that shopping list. And instead of handing the person a ticket, we handed them a bag full of presents that they had requested and said, "Merry Christmas." So those are the types of things that are rewarding, and that's what I mean when I say we need to engage the community and partner, because we want to change the paradigm of, people looking at the police as the enemy or, telling their kid to behave or they're going to get arrested. We need to change that model and that approach and say, look, we're the first ones that you should call because we've partnered with other organizations, and if you truly have a problem that you need solved, look at us as a resource, not the last resort. So it's changed significantly in the 9 years as I've been sheriff. That's very interesting. Because of so many instances, or it seems like so many instances over the past 5 or 6 years, where a shooting of one sort would occur, and it seemed like it was to bring out all these sort of antagonistic feelings, or make for very difficult situations for everybody concerned. And good to hear that maybe a different mindset is evolving. And growing. I guess I just wondered, the opioid crisis has obviously been in the news a lot over the past 5, 6, 7 years. And I guess I just wondered, does your department get involved with a lot of that? You must, I assume. Do.
And what's your takeaway on how that's going?
So again, you got to remember our funding sources. We're not really paid to have a task force of our own. So what we did was we partnered with the Southern Vermont Drug Task Force, which is a well-established task force model. It includes municipal agencies, state police, and sheriff's departments. And so since 2012, I've had a deputy in the Southern Vermont Drug Task Force who was working undercover behind the scenes looking for, the big fish, if you will. They're not interested in putting people who are using and addicted in jail. They're looking at the people who are bringing in large amounts and quantities from other states and dealing in a large volume of drugs. So we support that task force model. But again, you got to remember that when we have a contract and patrol for, let's say, the town of Dorset, their select board, very much like I'm sure the Manchester Select Board and the Bennington Select Board, set the policing priorities for that agency, or at least give the chief of those agencies a real good idea and understanding of what they want enforced and, the approaches that they're going to take. My select boards do that with us as well. So, if one of them came to me and said, hey, we have this extra money, we want to throw it at the opioid crisis, we could become more heavily involved. Another thing we did was brought back the K-9 program, which that helps in the interdiction and looking for the large quantities that are hidden in cars. And then an offshoot of that is not only just enforcing the drug laws, but that dog is also trained to track people, whether it be an elderly person or a child who's run away and we need to locate them to make sure they're safe, or somebody who flees the scene of a crime. So there are other, intertwined aspects of the K-9 program. And I got to tell you, the kids love seeing the dog when we bring them to the school. And our K-9's name is Millie, and she's a good addition to the force. So that's how we've attacked the opioid problem.
Okay. I was just wondering, how many towns in Bennington County do you have contracts with to provide services? All of them?
No,
one way or another,
of course, there are municipal agencies that have, so you have Winhall, you have Bennington and Manchester that have their own police department.
Right.
And then there's towns like Searsburg that we don't have a contract with, Rupert we don't have a contract with, but many of the other ones that we do. I believe it's up to 12 right now. And then in addition to that, we also have Governor's Highway Safety Grants, and those focus on obviously highway safety stuff, whether it be DUI or seat belts or cell phone use, that type of thing. So that's above and beyond any contract work, and they foot the bill on that for the officers to go out and enforce those types of laws. So.
In a story that was published in the Bennington Banner a couple weeks ago about your campaign, you mentioned, actually it was about your opponent's campaign, now I think about it, this business about a 5% administrative fee?
Yeah.
I'd never heard of that before. What is that all about?
So the legislature passed a law that if a sheriff wanted to go above and beyond the mandated functions of serving civil process and doing prisoner transports, that the agency needed a way to pay the sheriff for that extra mandate, that extra amount of work that they're going to have to do, the workforce that they're going to have to create and manage to fulfill other contract obligations. So what they did was the state pays my salary to do those two functions, okay? But the 5% was an encouragement for the sheriff to grow his or her organization. So by statute, I'm allowed and entitled to take 5% of the gross proceeds of any contract. The reality of that is that we run the business on not enough of a margin to fulfill a 5%. And so annually, I usually take between 1 and 1.5% to augment and supplement my income. And that puts me in line with the chiefs of police and lieutenant at the state police barracks as far as what our salaries are. So would I rather the state just pay me everything? Yes, that would be great. But the reality of it is that we're set up like a business, and that's how I have to augment my state salary.
Okay. Yeah. One of the big changes that, of course, that has occurred under your watch has been the movement of the headquarters from downtown Bennington, roughly, to a little bit on the outskirts of town, on the road down towards Pownell. That must have been a big change for the department.
It was. Now, the assistant judges of the county are actually responsible to pay for the building. But the reality of that is we were under a lease through Green Mountain Power for the 212 Lincoln Street location, and we had outgrown that facility, and we were having some issues with being handicap accessible. So I set out to really look for a building that would better suit our needs, and we'd be able to grow. And that property had been listed for some time. It was the old Ford garage, and then more recently it held the Plasan company where they were doing research and development. But it became vacant. And because there hadn't been a car dealership there in over a year, the town designated that back to rural residential from commercial. Well, that was probably bad for the seller, but good for us as the buyer because the property wasn't worth as much. And so we negotiated with the Carbone family who owned it. We came up with a purchase price of $175,000. We purchased it in May. We completely renovated it and moved in August. So we gutted the whole inside of that building and renovated it. And then the total mortgage on the property was $318,000, and we had over 6 acres of land. There's an additional building there that needs a lot of work and needs to be renovated, which is next on the list. But that property, I mean, the parking is great, the access to the community is great. We also partnered with a solar company to lease some of our land to help generate income to pay for the mortgage. So that's been successful. But it's certainly a much better place, a big undertaking. A lot of work went into that, and we're much happier where we are.
All right. And then just finally, sort of on a bit of a political note, this year you're running as a Democrat in the Democratic primary, obviously, and but in 2014 you were on a Republican line, I guess. Is that?
Well,
what explains that change?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's hard for people to understand why, but I'll get into that. But I really look at the job as sheriff as somewhat apolitical. Not really sure why we have to run as a party, but if you look at a lot of the programs and the philosophies that I have, I think it dovetails nicely with the Democratic Party platform. But more importantly, I looked at the national scope of what's going on, the real polarization, the nastiness, the rhetoric coming out of on a national level, and I just didn't want to be associated with that, and I didn't want this campaign to be a part of that. And so I felt that it was an appropriate time to make the change. And like I said, the Democratic platform fits nicely with how I manage the department. I think the whole customer service model that we have, if you think about it, if the towns aren't happy with our service, they're not going to hire us. So, you know, we have to be more responsive and cautious in how we treat people, more compassionate. And I think we do a really good job delivering on that. And I didn't want, you know, the party that I was associated with to be a poor reflection on our successes. And I think that kind of helps take away that stigma. So.
Okay. All right, well, August 14th is the primary date, so mark it on your calendars, folks, and get over to your local polling station or vote early if you'd rather, if you're going to be out of town or on vacation. And once again, real pleasure having Sheriff Chad Schmidt with us today to hear a little bit about his positions on the job of Bennington County Sheriff. I want to thank you all for being with us today. It's been a real pleasure having you with us, and we'll see you again next time. Have a great day.